And then I'm going to talk really quick about a couple things. So a lot of you have been with me before. Some of you, this is your absolute first time, and welcome. So I want to show a couple things real quick before we get started with Marc's discussion tonight. So share that screen. Great. And now we should be able to see PowerPoint. All right, perfect. So we're good to go. All right. So a couple things real quick. I just want to say, first of all, welcome and hello. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Nick Stover. I'm the founder of Nature Photography Classes, and I'm really excited to bring us all together today as part of the speaker series. So today we're going to be kicking off with the legendary Marc Adamus. For those of you that know Marc or familiar with landscape photography, his work's taken him all over the world. I'm really excited to be able to talk with Marc and more, or hear more, let you guys hear more from Marc in a setting like this. I've gotten to know him by participating in one of his workshops and through some other discussions. He has a tremendous view upon the natural landscape and what it looks like. So Marc's going to kick us off. We're also going to have Eric Bennett in about a week and a half talking to us. We'll send some information on that as well. But real quick, before we start with Marc, my mission behind Nature Photography Classes and why I created this is to help amateur landscape photographers who are interested in deeper connections create more impactful images so they can confidently and consistently express themselves. So in creating the speaker series and bringing together all these just luminaries and these amazing photographers and photographic educators, the idea is to help you guys take different steps and to see the landscapes in a much, much different way. So if we can accomplish a little bit of that tonight, well, we're going to be bringing forth some of those deeper connections we're working all the way through. Marc's going to be showing, not going to be showing tonight. He's going to be talking, which is going to be tremendously valuable, I think, for all of us to hear the words behind so many of his impactful images and what goes into play. For those of you that want to see more of Marc's work, it's on his website, marcadamus.com. I think most of you have taken a look around, which is part of the reason you're here. But a lot goes into these images, and these are just some of my favorites from Marc's images that I've kind of looked at over the years as inspiration for how he uses foreground, how he captures atmosphere, how he brings out a lot of the depth and dimensionality all the way through there. So with that, I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to turn it over to Marc to begin his discussion.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. Sorry about your computer difficulties there. It's not my strong suit, that's for sure.
Didn't need you to troubleshoot it.
I tend to have that effect on other people's tech devices as well. I don't know what it is. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to warn you, just be up front here. This is, I think, my third time ever on Zoom. It feels incredibly strange to me to be looking at this computer screen here and talking and not have anybody there. My passion is taking groups and people to the ends of the earth and all sorts of really cool places, really cool experiences. And I love talking to people. The computer, not so much, but we're going to give this a little try here. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got started, what my passion is for landscape photography, how I go about making some of my images and doing what I do, basically. I got started because I was really interested in outdoor adventures of all kinds. I was into climbing mountains. I was into long solo adventures in the middle of winter, ski traversing mountain ranges, things of that nature. I guess when I was 14 and 15, I'd spend so much time skipping school that it just kind of led me to the freedom of nature. I just really appreciated the simplicity, the fact that around every corner there's something new to see, something new to do. I'm a very visual person. I think that's probably why I have a lot of trouble talking to computer screens, as it's harder for me to relate to my environment. But when I when I first got started, I guess you could say was probably when I was about 15 years old. And I got out of school. I didn't ever want to go back. I knew from a very young age that what I wanted to do was travel. As soon as I could get a car, I got a car. I lived out of the car off and on for a couple of years, traveled all around the West, took odd jobs, worked in a whole bunch of kitchens, did anything I could to make money for a while. Led wilderness trips, organized wilderness trips. I've been doing that since I was 17. And eventually that just kind of led me to photography. I wouldn't be able to do an interview without telling you what the work of the late Galen Rowell meant to me personally. I got to know him through the climbing community. He was one of the guys that everybody looked up to, one of the foremost climbers of our whole generation. And there was a time in my life when I was really into the climbing. And, I looked at his photography and I said, wow, like if I could even make something half as good as this guy, that would just be terrific, way to document some of my adventures, some of the stuff I'm doing out there. And I really never looked back. He had a huge impact on my life. This was back in the film days, 2002. And it wasn't, too long after that everything started changing. I got my first computer in 2003 because I wanted to scan my film and submit things digitally to publications, whatnot. Prior to that point, I had never really been online, never did email, just was really late to that whole generation, didn't really have any interest in it. Still don't, to be completely honest with you. My passion is out in nature. My passion is exploration, is photography, is interpreting what's out there, not what's in here. But that led me to a lot of good things, posting my images online, getting in front of a larger audience, allowing digital submissions to magazines, to calendars, to stock agencies, to all sorts of different things. Photo contests, won a couple of photo contests. That sort of helped me to launch my career in those early days. Probably went, let's see, what was the end of 2005? I went digital, and things just really took off. So when I first went digital, it was a time when there really wasn't a lot of talk about Photoshop and post processing, in the sense that we have today. I mean, everybody was interested in it, but it wasn't very artistic. It was just, hey, how to color correct, how to optimize your image. And Photoshop didn't really work the way that I wanted it to either. So I kind of invented a new way of using Photoshop that's really distinctly my own. And like most things in life, I've kind of had to figure it out as I go, my own way, for better or worse. I had a lot of trouble in school growing up. I don't really learn that well from other people, for better or worse. I just kind of have to figure everything out. I'm just a natural born artist. I love to experiment with things. I'm highly visual. So I think that all just kind of played into me developing a career as a photographer and also leading groups all over the place out in the wilderness, because I really just love the freedom and the ability to express myself that lifestyle gives me. I think, learning art in general is all about personal expression. You have to be able to, you have to really get to the core of what it means to express yourself, not just what's in front of you. We oftentimes will say photography is art. Well, if I'm just documenting as closely as possible the scene that was in front of me at that moment, nature creates some amazing art. But I think the essence of art really is personal expression. And in that, I think I've always really desired for that. I've grew up drawing and sketching and painting, and I was just always that kid that just sits at the back of the classroom that was just lost in their own world, just imagining. Just I would draw these big post-apocalyptic landscapes and cities and all sorts of things. And I guess when I first started photography, I saw it more in a documentary sense, but then quickly, especially as we moved into digital, I said, wow, wait a second, I can paint the painting just kind of exactly the same way, or maybe not exactly the same, but similar way to how I always had. Just love to express myself through drawing and through sketching and everything else. So I really made a connection there. Uh, and I think that connection has kind of led me down the road to the types of images that I presently create. A lot of people will ask me, what do you do to your images, Mark? What in Photoshop, what are you trying to convey? What do you do? And also, what don't you do? And I think those are fair questions. Those are great questions. And for me, I kind of walk a line. So I'm a guide. I take people to the ends of the earth, all over the place, around the world, all 7 continents on these trips. And if they arrive at a location that I've photographed, I want them to know that they can be able to photograph it under certain conditions and under certain light, atmosphere, what have you, and have their photograph look like the one that I've captured. So I think in that sense, photography for me, it kind of shares a relationship with reality. Reality being what I perceive to be accurate in the world around me as it relates to color, light, and atmosphere. But I also take a lot of artistic liberties. I love to shape the light. I love to shape the atmosphere. I love to add and subtract different elements from different times that I consider to be non-permanent elements. Like, for example, who's to say how a wave, crashed on a rock, on the coast? If I can blend a couple different exposures, get just the right waves going just the way that I want, then sure, why not? The same goes for light, color, and atmosphere. There's elements of it that I consider to be ever changing, and if I can kind of emphasize those the way that I see best, then that for me is what I do in Photoshop, and I love doing it. And I do it with just a few tools. I mentioned that I kind of developed my own way of using Photoshop. I'm not going to show you that here. I'm sorry to let you know. But suffice it to say, I think as you're learning as an artist, you want to try to simplify. And I think the same is true with photography. You don't want to try to play every instrument all at the same time. You don't want to try to cook with every ingredient all at the same time, right? I feel like a lot of people, they fall into this trap of trying to constantly be learning new tools and try to figure out how every last little thing in Photoshop works. I feel like that can kind of be detrimental. To be honest, I don't know how 98% of Photoshop works. I don't use that in my editing. To be quite frank, the tools that I use in my editing really haven't changed much since about 2005, which is when I first started using Photoshop. So I like to keep it simple, and I like to be able to predict what's going to happen as soon as I stroke the brush. I think that's really a key way to get straight to the art, to let the art drive you. And by that, I mean, like, if I didn't know what was going to happen before I did whatever it was that I did, brushstroke, whatever in Photoshop, and I was still trying to figure out, I wonder how this tool works, I would be thinking too technically. I feel like I wouldn't be able to just release and let the mood that I want to create in the image guide me, or the light or the shape, the look and the feel, the emotion of the image. I wouldn't be able to let that guide me. So I feel like in a way, highly technical thought. How does something work specifically? Let me follow this exact recipe point by point by point. If I'm trying to think too technically, then that's kind of the opposite of artistic thought. So when I see, and I'm not gonna, go around. I mean, whatever you want to do is fine. I'm not gonna name names, but I feel like I see a lot of photographers that are constantly in that process of they want to follow recipes. They want to say, like, if I do this, 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 and this to this image in post processing, then that's going to yield this result, and it might for a very, very, very narrow percentage of images. But the way that I teach people when I'm out in the fields, when I'm giving lectures, seminars to groups, whatever, is I try to get people to think a little bit more conceptually. I try to get people to think about how is it that our camera sees differently than our eye. I think that's before we can even get into the art of working with a two-dimensional medium like Photoshop or like photography in general. We just kind of have to understand, like, how does our camera see differently than our eye? I've really been able to identify two primary ways that the camera sees differently than the eye. One is motion. As you're looking at me now, I'm moving side to side. The wind's blowing behind me, everything, and I'm far, I'm near, right? What that motion does is it allows us to interpret the spatial relationships between objects. And the more complex of scene you have, the more important that is. But the thing is, if you have a fixed, unmoving image from a specific point at a specific time, it's kind of like closing one eye and staying perfectly still and looking through this tiny little space. And I'll tell you, if you ever do this in your image, it still looks good, then it's probably a pretty good shot. Because we've kind of reduced all of our depth perception. We've reduced that motion, and we've reduced our ability to look left, right, near, far, refocus, all these things that allow us to interpret very complex scenes. So when I take an image into Photoshop, or when I compose an image in the field, I'm really looking for a way to create the sensation of motion. And people ask me, well, how do you do that, right? How do you make somebody feel like they can just step right into that image? Well, a lot of it has to do with what you see behind me here. I don't know. I'm in kind of our vineyard orchard here at one of our properties in Oregon, and you can see that it's almost like a tunnel, right? We've got some leading lines here. We've got a dark to light. We've got a higher level of what I call blacks up front. And we've got, as you can see, a lower level of blacks in the background. Things get hazier. They get more diffuse as we get further away. So what we're trying to do, in essence, is we're trying to create a transition that goes to the light source or to your focal point. And a lot of times they are one and the same thing. One of my favorite compositional rules is if you don't have light on your subject, put light behind your subject. And unfortunately, in this particular video, I am the subject. So you see a lot of leading lines. You see big to small transitions, dark to light transitions, cool to warm transitions. We've got all these different transitions that go from the close thing to me, and I've got light right behind me here. If you don't have light on the subject, put light behind the subject. If you don't have light hitting your mountain, put a sun star or something behind your mountain, and then make sure that you have a clean, fluid, unbroken transition of some kind that goes to that light source, because that's going to be where your eye wants to go. Another way that the camera sees differently than our eyes is dynamic range. Fortunately, if this zoom screen that I'm looking at is to be believed, it has pretty amazing dynamic range, because if you were to turn around and take this exact same scene with your camera, I would be way too dark unless you got a big reflector coming from the other direction or something, and the background would be completely blown out. So a lot of my best images, if you look at them, they're kind of the light is very dramatic, it's very strong. Actually, the most common time of day for me to take any photograph is about 2 hours prior to sunset or about 2 hours after sunrise. So at those times of day, the light is still very angular, but it's doing things for the landscape. It's penetrating through the clouds from above, and it's showing off different pieces of my environment. And a lot of my work, consequently, is about softening the light and using the light in a way that softens it, whether it's looking into the light source. That's another great rule for you. The stronger the light is, the more you want to look right into that light source. Get the fringe of everything illuminated instead of having these big blocky shadows. I'll give you forest photographers a really good tip right now. If you want to find the best place to photograph in a forest, go find the darkest place that you can possibly stand in that forest and look back out towards the light. And you're going to have exactly what you see here, a nice big to small, dark to light, cool to warm. You're going to have all these beautiful transitions, and that is going to create the sense of motion. And that's going to draw you through the scene. And then all you have to worry about is controlling that dynamic range. Now, fortunately, we're living in a day and age now where any camera on the market, if you control the highlights properly, if you push those highlights as bright as they possibly can be pushed, and you control the highlights at a reasonable ISO, let's say less than 800, you should have no problem extracting the shadow details from that image and having a pretty clean image to work with without having to blend exposures, blend shots like we had to do back in 2006 or whatever. We're living in incredible times as photographers because we have an awesome amount of freedom to do whatever we want. You see so many amazing styles out there these days. I think our art that we practice, especially the post-processing art, has really matured since I've been a photographer. When I first started, Photoshop was like this dirty word that people had to say, in whisper into somebody's ear, hey, did you Photoshop? It's now it's like it's assumed, right? Everybody has smartphone cameras now. So I mean, it's pretty obvious that all images are going to undergo some amount of post-processing, and that people are going to have the freedom to manipulate those images how they see fit. So once we understand kind of the basic ways that our eye sees differently than the camera, and we kind of look at ways in Photoshop to accentuate that, I think that's really the key to taking on landscape photography. The landscape photography is so much different than so many other types of photography. If I'm shooting sports, fashion, wildlife, products, whatever it may be, most of the time in photography, I want to kind of take a single subject and isolate that subject against everything else. I want to say, hey, this is what you look at, but in landscape, it's like putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle versus a 100-piece puzzle, so to speak. It's, and also there's more subjects, more primary subjects. Like an image may have multiple different primary subjects. Like I've got wildflowers, and then I got a waterfall, and then I got a bear, and then I've got a rainbow, and then I've got a mountain, and then I got a sunset. I mean, we hope, right? The more the better. That's what I always say. But I think a lot of us are taught to simplify the scene first and foremost, and that can be an incredibly effective tool. But for me, like the more different subjects that I can possibly, more different really cool things that I can put in my image and still get the image to flow cohesively, the happier I am. I just love doing it. I love the challenge of putting together those puzzles. So what I need to put together those puzzles is I need a really strong transition that guides the eye to that light source or to my focal point, which is a lot of times the same thing. Some great examples of that would be, let's say, level of blacks. Let's talk about level of blacks. Okay. This is what painters use. A lot of times people will say, all right, this is my mountain in the background of the shot. So I'm going to make this mountain really bright, really saturated, really contrasty. I'm going to jack the clarity up. I'm going to do all these things that I think is going to intensify the impact of that mountain. But the mountain is in the background of the image. And if I want to make people feel like that mountain is further away, I've got to make that mountain softer, less saturated, more diffuse. I've got to try to put all my heavy blacks, heavy contrast, heavy saturation, put that up close to me. And then as I direct the viewer through the screen, we're going to become lighter and less saturated, on and on and on. I mean, you can see,
so Marc,
Nick's doing screen
yeah,
here.
I don't know if you like this image right here. I don't know if you want to talk, like, if
Why
I look
not? Oh my God. If I had images to talk about, that'd be so easy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just tell me which ones you want to pull up.
Yeah, guys, not used to using Zoom here. My apologies. But that was, definitely, you see a level of blacks there, right? I mean, the peak is kind of misty, diffuse, but it's a lot of that's had to have been applied in Photoshop because that shot was an 11mm shot. And you know what happens when you're an 11mm is that peak was so close to me when I shot that image. I was having to look up like this just to look at the summit, right? So there wasn't a lot of natural atmospheric diffusion between me and the peak, like such that you would get with maybe a 200 millimeter image. Like if we were doing a telephoto shot, over the Great Smoky Mountains, right? Of course, layer after layer after layer is going to be less and less and less, black, less saturated, everything in the distance, right? You can see the images there on the website. I'll just blindly look away and Nick can select any image on my whole website, and I can tell you that whatever image he picks is going to have a great transition of some kind that draws the eye from the near stuff to the far stuff. You're supposed to pick an image, Nick.
I know. I'm working on it, Marc. I'm not as fast as you, so
just blindly click at anything.
Yeah, but I think these are like your illustrations on these. Exactly.
When I take a shot like that, okay, maybe the area back by the waterfall there is just as dark and just as contrasty as the foreground, right? And if you look at those foreground rocks there, you look at those close-up trees, they're about 80-90% black. And then you look at that waterfall area back there, and the deepest, darkest blacks are only about 40 or 50%. So it's lighter, it's got a big to small transition, it's got a dark to light, it's got a cool to warm, it's got a lot of these things that are really kind of helping to lead the eye into the frame. And that's what I love to do. And I think that's what's necessary when you shoot like I do, which is you want to give the viewer a very grandiose sense of scale and depth. And you want to really say, hey, I'm standing here looking at this. I'm immersed in this scene. Now, there's nothing wrong with taking just a little glimpse of something like lichen on the side of the rock and making a whole picture out of that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But when you have a really complex image like this, the more complex it is, the more it benefits from that sense of motion. Let me give you guys an example. So if I'm in a rainforest and I take a video walking through that rainforest, it's amazing. I could see all the leaves coming and going. I could see, I get this immersive experience right away. But when I take a still photograph of a rainforest, it's like, wow, okay, this is tough. I've got all these details and I've got to find a path. I got to use something that draws the eye, from whatever is near to whatever is far, or whatever isn't the light to whatever is the light. And just the way that we see is from dark to light. I mean, we're used to the things at our feet being dark and the things up above being light. I mean, the transition can work both ways, certainly, but I usually like to draw the eye to the light into the background, like you see in that image there. So, you can see this.
Marc, we've had a couple questions come, not to hijack your talk at any stretch, but we've had a couple questions come in on composition. And I think, one of the things I've learned from you in the time we spent together is how you think about framing.
All right, so here it is, guys. Here it is. 3 types of composition. There's only 3. All right. If you want to draw the eye from something that's close in your foreground, like a lot of us landscape guys do, to something that's distant in the background, there's 3 basic structures that I look for. There's leading lines, there's framing, and there's layers. Okay, layers is that example I gave you, looking over the Great Smoky Mountains, right? Sand dunes, that's another layer composition. You know, this right here is framing, but there's also elements of layers, right? There's elements of leading lines, but dominant compositional structure. I'm going to pick from one of those dominant compositional structures. And then within each structure, I'm going to use some sort of transition. In this case, it's a big to small, it's a dark to light, it's a cool to warm. And once again, you can see those level of blacks, right? You look at the deepest, darkest blacks on the wood, and they're way deeper and darker than they were way back where that light's coming through, right? And then there's all sorts of other rules. Let me give you some of my favorite compositional rules. We already talked about if you don't have light on your subject, you know, put light behind your subject. We talked about the stronger the light is, the more you want to look it into the light. The next time you're in a forest at high noon on a sunny day, look into a bit, you know, take out your wide angle, include the sky, get a big sun star coming through the trees, go back, expand the dynamic range. You're going to be more successful than you would be even on a cloudy day, probably. This shot here, you see a lot of edge control, except for the upper left corner. I don't know what I was thinking there, but you know, there's, we want to try to keep those edges, you know, as clean as possible. I think I just couldn't live without the curve of that piece of wood, quite frankly, but at least I kept it dark, right? You know, just not drawing too much attention. I want to make sure, I mean, they don't make picture frames for a reason, right, guys? I mean, it's like we want to try to make sure that unless it is the focal point, we don't want to have something really bright, something really important on the edge of our frame. Rule of, you know, when I do in the field, when I'm diagnosing people's images, is I give everything the rule of 6. So the rule of 6 means that you break a 2x3 image down into the only 6 squares that you can possibly break it into, and equal squares. And I look at each one and I say, is there something that is really important that's really adding to the compositional structure of this image, or is it just not adding at all? Right. And I feel like a lot of times people look at their images and it's like, hey, there's something wrong here, but what is wrong? What do I need to change? Well, less is usually more in all photography. I think we all learned that on, you know, day number 1 of a photo 101 course, you know, simplify the scene. But with landscape, sometimes it can be tough, you know, so that's just one way of kind of breaking your image down a little bit more and kind of looking a little bit more closely. And if you could find one of those 6 that just doesn't have anything in it, that's not really adding to the mood or the feel or the shape of the composition or whatever, then recompose, get rid of that. There you see a big to small, a dark to light, right? Another thing that I really like to do is I like to either have side light in my shots, or I like to look into the light. I don't generally like to have the light right at my back because everything looks flat, you know, and that image just reminded me of it because the light was almost directly at my back. And that's kind of a rarity in my images. If it's like crazy red light, then okay, fine. You know, this is exactly the kind of image that people used to tell you not to shoot, you know, just not that many years ago. I bet if you guys looked up a bunch of photography videos on YouTube, you'd probably, you know, still find a whole bunch of guys saying, oh, don't shoot, you know, into the sun, and don't shoot at, you know, 10 a.m., you know, 2 hours after the sun's come up right into the bright sky like this, you know. But that's exactly what I love to do. I like to take on that really strong light. Now, one of the things, just to get back to what I was telling you about in Photoshop, one of the things that I think that you see is people shoot for how much they know about the post-processing end of things. So, you know, let me give you a 1 to 10 scale. Okay. If if 10's the best image you ever saw and one's a complete piece of junk, there's plenty of images like this one per se, that in my camera, if I'm just looking at the screen, they look like a 3. But if I expand the dynamic range and I soften the light and I bring back that color and I kind of balance the scene a little bit in processing, that image can become an 8, let's say. But on the other hand, there's a lot of shots that are maybe a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10, but no matter what you do to them in post processing, they can only ever become maybe a 7 at the most. So I think that the people that know a lot about post processing, they have an easier time identifying the 3s and that could become 8s, and the people that don't, sure, we can all take 8s, there's always going to be just amazing shots out there, even if you don't post process them. But you've got to really put those two worlds together as you're composing. So when I take a shot, let me just tell you a little bit about when I take images, I probably have a really good idea of how I'm going to process them. And I'm not telling you that that's right or wrong. If you're one of those people that goes back to all your images 3 years later and processes them again, then great. More power to you. That's awesome. But I really, really like to process my images right away. There's not times when I go back to my portfolio and reprocess things. Usually, if you look at my website, the stuff that's on there that I took in 2006, that was processed in 2006. Would I do it differently today? Yeah. But I like to just move forward, and I like to do things quickly. I like to have the moment that I spent in the field and what I was thinking about out there in the field fresh in my mind when I go into post processing. Usually I have a lot of ideas, when I'm going into post processing of how I'm going to do something. And I like to realize those ideas right away. True fact, there hasn't been any trip since the pandemic that I've done where I haven't processed all of my work from that trip within 3 days of doing the trip. I process fast. I get my stuff done right away. And I love to have that moment like fresh in my mind when I'm doing things. Hey, there's a layered composition, right? We've been looking at all these leading lines and, stuff. There's a lot of little compositional rules that people will give you.
Here, I'll pull up
That
a,
I
here's a layered one, I think, for you to talk about.
Yeah, there's another layered one, right? So another good, let's just get back to some of the compositional rules here. There's a nice directional light source. I always love to, if I'm not looking into the sun directly, I always want to make the viewer believe that the light is coming from more one direction than the other direction. If I have the light coming from equally the right side and the left side, it just kind of creates a compositional tension for me. Another thing that alleviates compositional tension is a rule of odd numbers. We've always heard of the rule of thirds, right? Well, if you did a drawing course, people would talk about the rule of odd numbers, right? And it could be 3, 5, 7. If you have two mountains that are the same exact height and the same shape, same lighting, everything, it's just really, really hard to move the eye through your scene. But then as soon as you add a third focal point, like a third mountain or a sun star in between the mountains or whatever, then it becomes a good rule of thirds or a good rule of odd numbers. This is, I don't know, there's probably 17 layers in that shot. I don't know, but it's definitely a rule of thirds, right? You got a third sky and you got 2/3 foreground layers. And in those foreground layers, you've got a big to smaller to smaller to smaller, smaller. You've got a really hazy to lighter, to lighter, lighter, lighter. You got really saturated to less saturated in the distance. So, all of these compositional rules apply to each and every one of my images. We couldn't bring up any image in my entire portfolio, even my intimate scenes, even my most abstracty scenes, and, not be able to identify one strong transition that goes from near to far or from everything that isn't the light source to the light source. All of them, right? So find your basic structure. think about how you're going to post process it. If you're going to blend something, know how you're going to blend it when you're taking the shot, not when you come back home. You got to know this when you're taking the shot. And then create some sort of transition. That's how I think about composition. Spacing between primary subjects. There's another good compositional rule. That cactus thought just made me, it shot just made me think of this. That shot there, that was the first shot that I ever focus stacked. This was back when people had absolutely no idea what focus stacking was, and we hadn't even invented the term focus stacking yet. It was just focal point blending. And it took me about 20 hours in post-processing to figure out how to combine 10 different shots for cactus, because the first cactus was so out of focus in that shot that I couldn't even see where it was when I took the shot. But painstakingly, I used some highlight specific blending modes kind of around some certain edges, and just did some really complicated manual blending. And, a year later, it was in a National Geographic calendar. So it was definitely worth it to get that big to small transition. If you look at the background, of course, there's the dark to light, there's the haziness, there's the mistiness in the background. If it doesn't have one dominant transition like that, it's not going to work that well. And even though there's great layers in that shot, I would consider that a framing shot. You got a big thing on the left, you got a big thing on the right, and there's your focal point in the middle, that sun star. So I would consider that to be a basic framing composition. And look at the spacing between the primary subjects, right? If I have, big cactus breaking the horizon, if I've got really important cactus overlapping another really important cactus, then it just doesn't really flow quite as well for me. So I always try to keep that rule in mind too, spacing between primary subjects. Obviously, if you got an owl in your shot, you don't want it overlapping another owl. But even something as simple as cactus or ferns or something like that, I want to get at the right angle to give the viewer a nice big, medium, small transition through those subjects. But I don't want them to actually be touching each other. And if they are, I want to make sure at least the highlights of those things are not touching each other, so that we have nice compositional spacing. So, that's kind of how I think. To answer the questions about composition, that's kind of how I think about it, right?
So not related to compositioning, but related to composites. I think we've had a couple questions come in related to that. How often do you, I know the answer to this question. How often do you composite?
Just at the start, to go back to address that again, everything that you see in my images was there to a certain extent. It's just been, let's see, how do I want to put this? How did I put it to begin with? Permanent subject matter, right? If it's like a moon that could only rise in a certain place, I'm not going to put the moon into my shot in a different place. Would I put a moon there? Yeah, I probably would put a moon there if I really felt like it needed, but I would make sure that the moon absolutely, was in that exact position and would have looked that exact same way. Skies, not so much. I usually use the sky that I had. I do a lot of work on the sky. A shot like this is taken like 2.5 hours before sunset. So it's not even close to like sunset colors yet, but you know me, I'm a sucker for sunset colors. If I feel like adding a few clouds or adding a few little bit of mist in front of the mountains is going to really accentuate the shot, or occasionally even adding a whole different sky, then I'm not opposed to doing that. I definitely do that. Some of you guys have seen my post-processing video on this image. I don't know if that's why Nick chose it, but this is like this is kind of like the ultimate example of putting together different pieces, probably about as far as I would ever go as far as compositing shots go. And I actually had to take a little bit of the stream, the water in the stream, from a different image that was just a little bit downstream of there, just because I didn't have quite enough luminosity in the water. And in addition to that, I did let's see, I blended a little bit of extra flowers in there from another spot because the lupine was actually growing there had died. It hadn't died, but it had gone to seed and it wasn't looking as healthy as it should. So I was like, hey, let's just, go pick a couple extra lupines from a different shot, kind of put those in there too. All the big flowers, the channel of the stream, the lakes, the peaks, the clouds, those were all there. But I'd made some embellishments here and there from things that I thought could have actually occurred and were actually there, but may have just not peaked at that time. Because again, I am a tour guide, right? Like that's my passion in life, is to take people on trips, especially to really remote areas where we're exploring new and interesting stuff. So if somebody has gone for 2 weeks, trekking through the Himalayas or whatever and journeyed across the world to get to this one spot to this that I took, and my mount, and let's say I stretched my mountain to look like Cerro Torre or something. If they go there and they don't see that mountain or they don't see those permanent subjects that are in my image, then they're going to be a little bit grumpy sometimes. They're like, hey, what gives? I can't get this shot. There's no mountain that even looks remotely like that. But then the flip side of that, I think, is that just by passing light through a lens, we are manipulating things quite a bit. If you take a mountain like that right there and you put it towards the top of a wide angle frame, and that's like the sheerest, most vertical peak I've ever seen anyhow, even without that, it's going to stretch it wildly. Or if you use a 400 millimeter, it's going to compress things wildly. So there is quite a bit of perspective manipulation that goes on just inherent to each and every lens that we choose to use as photographers. But on the flip side, I want people to be able to believe that if they go there, they could get those images. They could see a place that looks like what they saw in my shots. So that's kind of what I do. What I don't do, it just comes down to permanent subject matter. In this particular case, everything was actually shot at that time. The foreground is a little bit blurry because I had to do massive noise reduction on that. And that took me like half an hour to stack that shot. And the moon was coming up as I stacked the shot. So it was really a long time. It was, like a 10-second exposure for the sky and the cloud, right as the moon's coming up. And then was like about 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes times like 8 for the foreground at f5.6. So it's pretty noisy shot, but it was worth it to get that moonlight on the peak because the sun at that time of year could have never illuminated the peak in that way. So I really needed the moon to do it. By that time of year, the sun was too far to the south, but the full moon was exactly what I needed. So that's kind of how I think about the just what I do and what I don't do and what I composite and what I don't composite. The more I can do without compositing, the better. But there's also plenty of times where I'm thinking about, well, I need to stitch 7 images and focus stack them and take the clouds from 3 other extra images and add a bunch of atmosphere to this, and if I'm thinking about that as I'm out in the field, then I'm usually pretty successful putting it together. So that's how I would answer that question.
Good answer. Thank you. So, well, we've hijacked you for a little bit. Why don't you can go back to what you wanted to talk about as other points. We got about 35 minutes left, so there's definitely other questions, but I know you had some other things you wanted to bring forward, so keep it rolling.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think what really draws me to nature photography is I think there's a deep innate human desire to go out into nature, capture something and bring it back. for the tribe, for your people, for to share, to give, to show, to whatever. I mean, we used to do this with hunting, fishing, gathering, whatever it may be. And I think that that is deeply rooted in human existence. And I think that it doesn't have to go away in this day and age. I think we have an unparalleled ability to share with a wide audience. Our tribe is the world these days. We can give back this little piece that we have found, somewhere in earth, and share it, and we can kind of impart to that a little bit of ourself. We confuse it with our own artistic vision. And I think that's what's always really drawn me to doing this. And that's why I feel most at home out in the wilderness, leading groups, showing people things. For me, my business leading group, it doesn't even feel like what you might call a business. It just, sure, I got to pay my taxes like everybody else, but it's like I couldn't do anything else. This is what I really wanted to do my whole life. The experience, I feel privileged to be able to take people to see these amazing places. And the more remote they are, the harder it is to get to, the better I feel about it. And I really want them to appreciate it. For me, I tell people, hey, I retired at 25, 20 years ago, and I'll never, truly retire from doing this. A lot of people ask me on my tours, especially the ones that I'm doing to places that I've already been before, Mark, why don't you shoot? Why don't we see you taking photographs on the tour? Why are you just, I'm usually so immersed in the experience that I'm giving other people and just coming around to see how they're doing. That I think that's what's most fulfilling to me. I'll give you an example. Like if you take somebody fishing, they're not going fishing just because they want to bring home this specific fish all the time, right? I mean, maybe they just enjoy the process of fishing. They enjoy everything that comes with getting to know the time of year and the seasons and the water and the weather and all this. And it all leads up to that one moment when you're able to capture something. And it's that process that is so intriguing to me. So if somebody else is pressing the shutter at the end of the day and they're bringing something home and they're really happy about it, then that's great. Then I am really stoked. When it comes to my own personal photography, though, I do consider myself an exploration photographer. So I want to talk about what that means to me. So I've talked about the importance of just constantly exploring in my life and just kind of figuring things out my own way and not really wanting to get any recipes on how to do things. And I think, for me, probably 80% or more of all of my images come from the very first time that I ever saw a place. Now, I know a lot of you guys say, hey, isn't nature photography, isn't landscape photography about just going back over and over and over and over again until you get the perfect light or the perfect colors, or you really get to know an area or develop a relationship with an area. But let me throw this at you. For me, there's nothing like your first time. It is so vivid, the experience. The first time I walk around the corner and I see these mountains, or I see this waterfall, or I see whatever it is, that experience is so vivid. And it just instantly puts me in the zone. It focuses me like a laser, and it just says, hey, take my picture, find some way to capture this moment, this vivid experience that I'm having right now. And that's what I love. I almost all of my images, I had never seen that place before, and I didn't even know what was going to happen. I mean, I may have had some intuition as to like what type of scene it might be. Is there some big jagged mountain there with a stream? Is there something like that? But I just love exploring. And I love taking people with me in exploring. And if you came on one of my trips, one of my signature trips to Patagonia or Himalayas or something like that, if you did not take a camera, you would still be you would be amazed, and if I didn't have my camera with me, that would still be the first thing that I would be doing, would be going to one of these places. So I think that as time has gone on, my business as it pertains to photography has become less and less about teaching people, okay, here's all the basics of composition, here's all the post-processing tools I use, here's all the gear I use, that sort of thing. And it's become more about, I just want to lead, trips. I just want to provide some unique logistics that people need to get themselves, out to these, untouched places, and there's so many places. I mean, once you're looking at helicoptering into some place or backpacking for 2 weeks, or you've got your own boat and you're going out to sea, into some unknown, collection of fjords, archipelago that's never been explored. Once you manage to get the logistics down and figure out how you're going to get these, people to these places, or get yourself to these places, there's more there. It seems like there's more unexplored places in the world than there are explored places in the world. And for me, that's really exciting. And I think to a certain extent, it's always going to be that way. And I think it really surprises people to hear that there's probably more places where you can get away from people now than there was 20 years ago. And people are like, what? No way. How can that be true? Every place I go is crowded. Yeah, because you use Instagram as a map to get to everywhere. That's why. What social media and the internet age has done is it's given everybody recipes. Everybody has exact GPS coordinates for how to get to a specific place and do a specific thing at a specific time. And lo and behold, when you show up there, there's 100 other people. Big surprise, right? Go to a national park, to some, famous overlook, and there's, 5 times more people than you ever remember being there before. Yeah, because they all have a recipe for how to exactly to get to that place. But it used to be, when we started, when I was growing up, when I started adventuring, people would just look at maps. They'd get out the big old paper maps, topographical maps for the wilderness, street maps, they buy atlases, whatever. And they're just past that. There wasn't really a road map. I mean, there was guidebooks, but it was like you'd get lost half the time just trying to find anything. And you just didn't have, exact GPS coordinates and 10 pages of, written examples for exactly how to do this specific thing. So when you get half a mile off a trail in this day and age, there's, odds are there's not going to be anybody there. When you go someplace that you didn't see on Instagram, that you couldn't Google a shot of, then there's not going to be anybody there. And there's a whole heck of a lot of those places. I know I spend most of my year in those places. I mean, I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen another photographer at one of the places that I've gone this entire year. And that's just what I love. I love the unknown. And I think it's a really big part of my art. And I think that it's really enlightening for me to just not have this recipe, to not know what I'm going to be there, because that if I don't know what's going to be there, that also focuses me. That's like, okay, well, the possibilities are endless. It seems like so many people in the landscape photography community, they get tunnel vision and they're like, I'm going to go and I'm going to get this exact shot, right? But in doing that, they tend to forget about what all is around them. What other possibilities might be there? What other things can they do? So I really want to get people to think about that by putting them in places where they can't just Instagram the shots. We're not going to the same exact shot I took. My favorite thing to do is look at some place I've never been and just find a way to make it. So that's kind of how I see my own photography and just exploration. I've always loved exploring. I've always loved, even, when my trips before photography, they were all just, hey, I want to go hike somewhere. I want to go climb somewhere. If I could avoid a trail, if I could avoid the well-trodden route, up something, then that would always be what I would do. And just the further out there I could get into the more lesser known areas, the better. And for me, that's what really does it for me, is just the exploration. There's there right there, that shot. Uh, this, I want to talk about that shot for a second because, I'm a visual guy, and Nick's helping me out a lot here by showing me some shots here, because that's what I love doing, talking about places. So this is a place most of you guys have seen by now, Tombstone Territorial Park in the northern Yukon Territory of Canada. But the reason that most of you guys have seen it is because of photographers. At this time, back in, what was it, 2011, when I took that shot, I really couldn't say that very many photographers had really been to that place, specifically at that time of year, which was, I don't know, probably about the end of October, early November. And it was, now unfortunately, there is quite a few people that go there now. And I mean, thankfully for us, the Park Service has done a really good job of limiting the number of people that get in there, but you pretty much have to win the lottery to get a permit to go hiking in there during the peak season these days. And that can be kind of the downside to tourism, but I can tell you the upside to tourism is that there's other places like in Mexico where I've gone, or Pakistan, or other places around the world where these are like areas that are really endangered from development, from the industry, from they don't have protections. And in those cases, if photographers go there and they turn it into something really popular and they all want to go there, a place like this, right? Just off there's 40-story skyscrapers just out of the right side of that frame that you can't see, believe it or not. There's old mines, there's graffiti, there's piles of garbage, there's dilapidated buildings, there's all sorts of things going on in that area. And, photographers move in and they start taking pictures like this. And then everybody's like, hey, wait a second, maybe there's a financial incentive for us to protect this, to preserve it as a park, to clean it up, to keep this area natural. And I mean, I hate that there has to be a financial incentive, but guys, there does have to be a financial incentive here. I mean, these are politicians we're dealing with a lot of times that are making these decisions about who gets to develop these areas and how. So I think tourism can kind of work both ways. So for me, I kind of like to always keep it moving into lesser known areas of the world, in the places that are kind of self-limiting in nature. I spend about 5 months of my year doing helicopter trips. And we do helicopter trips all over my state of Alaska, where my trips are based, most of my trips. We also do a lot of helicopter stuff in New Zealand, a little bit in Patagonia, a little bit in some other places across the Himalayas, other things like that. We even do some helicopter stuff in Mexico there too. We like to get people into really, really remote areas where, like, even if you do capture a great shot there, it goes viral online, there's not going to be 10,000 people lining up to get in there, because it is kind of naturally limiting. The thing we do when we're not doing helicopter stuff is we just hike for a really, really, really long way. When I first started doing tours, the only kind of tours I did was backpacking tours. And, that carried over from my time just guiding and organizing wilderness trips. So when I started doing photography trips, I thought, well, heck, let's do some backpacking photography trips, and that went around. It went all right, but I mean, it didn't take me more than a few years to realize that there's very few people that do backpacking photography trips, and as much as I like backpacking myself, there's just a very limited clientele for those types of trips. So I think we've kind of got a happy medium going right now. We like to do a lot of boat in stuff, a lot of heli in stuff. We fly bush planes into places, so I like to operate in places that are kind of self-limiting so they don't just go completely viral overnight. Or I like to work in places that I feel like are rather endangered. I'll tell you, this spot right here is very endangered. This is the Golden Sand Dunes near Skardu in Pakistan, which is a city which is rapidly, rapidly expanding. And I would not be surprised at all if these sand dunes are getting paved over any minute now. There's civilization encroaching all around from all sides. People are starting to clear some of the dunes and build on top of some of the dunes. And I mean, hopefully nature fights back a little bit and we can preserve this area, by letting people recognize, hey, what beautiful, unique area this is. So a lot of times the story behind the scenes isn't exactly what is portrayed in the image. I don't take pictures of the hand of man. I don't take pictures of the graffiti. I don't take pictures of garbage dumps because it's just not what motivates me personally. But if I did, I think that would send a powerful message too. So maybe I just will one of these days. Maybe I'll just, get out there and I'll show you the other side of some of this stuff. Bristlecone pines.
Yeah.
These guys are pretty, that's actually where I was yesterday with the group, was right there.
Yeah. That's where I'm going to be on Thursday. So we missed you by a couple days. So.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Maybe not this exact spot, but I'll be up in the bristles.
Oh, no. Yeah. And speaking of that, though, we had our group hike about 6 miles round trip out to this really remote grove in this place called the Tres Plumas Plateau. And there's a whole bunch more bristlecones over there. You guys should check it out sometime. There's no trails to get out there. There's no formal route to get out there, but you just keep walking. I mean, look it up, figure out where the Tres Plumas Plateau is. This is tons of bristlecones out there. You can also explore the Shulman Grove. You could explore the Patriarch Grove. You could go to Great Basin National Park, for goodness sakes. I mean, hopefully somebody in this group knows where Great Basin National Park is. That's absolutely amazing. We got some bristlecones over there, and you've got huge cliffs and towering peaks and all kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of places you can see bristlecone pines. They're the oldest trees in the world. And, I think that, branch out, please don't all go to the same tree. I don't know where you're going, Nick, but I'm sorry, like 60%, and I don't know what you guys are doing, but 60% of every bristlecone shot you see online is the same tree. There are other ones, just FYI, lots of other ones, really, really, really beautiful ones. Oh yeah. See, I was just saying when I don't do hand of man in my shots, and there you go.
Yeah, I got to prove you wrong every once in a while. So.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of questions, some of which we'll be able to answer, some we won't. But I think one of the things I wanted to share, one individual, Lance shared, he's 15. I want to say thank you. Your work is what got him into photography, and it's changed his life.
Awesome.
So certainly nice to hear. And I had another question come in. I think you mentioned in your mid-20s is when you started taking photography seriously.
It was my early 20s. It was the late 90s, but then it was 99 or so, I think, is when I got a professional camera. But I wasn't actually able to go professional until 2004.
Okay. That's good to know. And then Saudi wants to know, he's going to see you in a little while. He could ask you this question, but how much time do you personally spend in a region or a place before you feel good about taking others there with you?
Oh man, absolutely no time at all. I feel like the process, like we've already talked about me being an exploration photographer, right? Well, one of the best tools that I can give you, one of my favorite things to share with you guys, and one of the most valuable things I think that you can possibly take is just that art of exploration. Like, how do you go about breaking down a place and finding new routes and finding where you're going to take these photographs, right? I mean, that's super exciting. And that's a big part of what every photographer that, maybe not every photographer, but that's a big part of what I want to teach people. And that's an important part of getting to be able to do the types of things that I do. People so many times they complain about, oh, well, all these places, they've just been shot and shot to death. Yeah, well, one of the best things I can teach you is how to just think conceptually and just explore and know that when you get there, you're going to come up with something good. And also when it's some place that's really, really remote, uh, just, you want to know how to kind of break that down logistically, how to best access the place, whether it's preparing for a backpacking trip, preparing for a hiking trip, preparing for a helicopter trip, getting crew together for a boating trip, other guides, networking, all this stuff. It's all part of the adventure. So I do some of my what I call expedition trips, which is just me and friends of mine, which are also clients from past workshops that I do, and we'll just go on to places that none of us have ever been. And I think that that's a really valuable thing to be able to give people too.
Yeah. Another one came in, which is really, that was in here a little bit further. I like this one too. And we'll talk about, this will actually dovetail into what cause you're going to be supporting with some of the proceeds from the registrations. But do you think your photos, or in your experience, Mark, what experiences have been in helping others to be convinced to protect nature more? What's been your kind of, because your photos are so inspirational and bring out the different things. So
it's just great because you run into people all the time in nature photography that they kind of came at it from the reverse of where I came at it. Like maybe they just like to travel, let's say they work a job in a city, whatever, but they really like to get out and travel. And they really like to see new places. And they've always just admired like how beautiful nature is. And they start taking pictures of it, and it just, like, as soon as they involve themselves in photography, it deepens their experience. It enriches their experience. It causes them to think about every little minute detail of, where they're going and what they're doing. And I think that you've seen people that really had, no experience. Like I've taken hundreds of people camping for the first time in their life. I mean, camping, it never camped in their life. I had a 74-year-old guy in Alaska, that had never camped in his whole life. And his first night camping ever in his life is on top of this knoll filled with wildflowers, 3,000 vertical feet over this glacier, half a mile wide, looking at these huge jagged mountains. And I mean, that's just like, it is like an first amazing experience. If you're going to go all out, it just like, to see how that it changes people's lives and opens up new way to connect with nature for so many people is just great. So for sure. There's people that never thought they'd find themselves backpacking or hiking or camping or getting thigh deep at the bottom in a stream, just to photograph a waterfall, whatever it may be. There's people that barely ever leave the city that, something, that photo bug bit them, and somehow they got attracted into the landscapes and stuff. And now they're out on a, boating through the fjords of Patagonia, looking at something like that. Right.
Yeah. Well, this dovetails actually into an interesting question that I think we'll probably ask this one of Guy Tall when he's on in November. But do you think, what do you see there's going to be any impacts with the computer generated portion where you think people are going to stop wanting to go to places like this, or potentially even start to shift away from popular locations by
all this AI and all this other stuff for.
Oh man, for sure. Like AI is going to change everything. I mean, AI is just going to be crazy, crazy, paradigm shift with everything is in regards to like the post-processing end of things. But anybody that stops going to a place and stops taking the picture with a camera is just not a true lover of the experience. I mean, that's just fact. I mean, it's, we take the picture because that's our personal experience. That it's not because we just want to have this picture on the wall, right? I mean, it's like, look, I mean, there's still people that want to play instruments, that's not a very good example because you make music on the computer, but there's people that just they just want to eat the fish. They don't want to actually go out and participate in catching the fish, but there's always going to be those people. There's the people that really want the experience, and during their experience they want a picture that showed that exact moment in time, how they want to remember it. And AI is going to help us with all the technical side of post-processing, and it's going to help us to create maybe even like the mood or the look or feel. And AI is going to generate these incredible images of, especially of iconic places, that it's seen before, that it's learned how to generate. If you're somebody that's shooting maroon bells, right now in Colorado, I mean, AI is probably going to have that one down before long, but you're still going to want to capture the exact clouds, the exact light, the exact ripples on the water. Just, you're still going to want to make that experience yours. But for somebody like me that's constantly going to new places and exploring and finding new stuff to shoot, creating that new content that hasn't been done before, I think it's exponentially more important to us to actually have the camera with us and actually be a part of that experience and have that image be representative of the experience itself.
Yeah. Great
And
answer. Good question.
is just never, it will never make up for that. Never. I mean, there's just, there's going to be a lot of crazy AI generated images out there, but none of them are going to have anything to do with the experience that people actually are having.
Yeah. So what organization are we supporting today, Mark? What are we making a donation to?
Nature Conservancy.
All right. Sounds good. Anything you want to say about your work with them? I know you do a lot of volunteer work and donating prints to charitable organizations. And
yeah, man. I mean, I'm glad we got to touch on that a little bit, just during the talk today, just about, especially about the pros and cons, of travel and tourism and going to certain areas. That was actually the impetus for my trip to Mexico. Was I got contacted by a local photographer there who wanted some help in kind of publicizing that area because it was starting to get really developed, and there was a big debate locally about how the park status that it just received should be treated, and whether it should undergo further development and cleanup and funding and all these things. And I think photographers can play a big role in that. I've never charged at all for any of my images that go to any sort of environmental cause, any sort of natural cause. Certainly I get a lot of requests for that sort of thing. And I think we all just got to do our part, to not, to travel, as responsibly as we can, and do so for the right reasons.
Yeah, that's great. So we still have a couple minutes of questions. I wanted to cover a couple things and then give you, we have a couple more questions if we have time, but I wanted to cover a couple things and then give you time for any closing thoughts or whatever. But in the chat, which I did get working right after you started.
Oh, you did? Okay, yeah, good. So good. Well, congratulations.
Hey, thanks. That. It's been a big day, I guess. So we got working with a lot of really positive comments in the chat. I definitely encourage those of you that have gotten parts and pieces out of Marc's to share that now in the chat. I'll share the chat logs with Marc later. He obviously is been busy talking and about the aspects and going all the way through. So, but please. So I'm going to share just a couple quick things to kind of finish this out. And then we'll go back to Mark, some stuff popping up in the chat now. So just related to the speaker series, first of all, I want to say thanks for coming. A lot of you have registered for the entire series. And if you haven't, when I send out the information tomorrow, I need to start the share now. Sorry, you'll get this stuff. You can scan this QR code with your phone, which will take you to a landing page to get signed up. But the diversity of our speakers that are going to be talking about the landscape and different perspectives. Eric's presentation next week's about exclusion. Guy's going to be talking about creativity and expression. Aaron's going to be spending some time about developing your creative voice, so on and so forth. So it's going to be a really good kind of variety to pull things together, and the topics. And some people are going to use visual aids more so, visual presentations more so than really speaking from the heart like Mark. But I'm really excited. So please consider joining next week, or excuse me. Yeah, it is next Friday for Eric Bennett. He was the inaugural winner of the National Natural Landscape Photography Awards. Eric's cited numerous times how Mark has been a major influence of him and his work and what he does all the way through. So there's just a teeny tiny bit of the previews for the people that don't know about it. So Sarah's going to be finishing us off in December. She's more on the small scene sides and expansive mindset. So it's going to be really exciting. And then two other things. One is I'm teaching a class partnered with McKenna on preparing your images for your own photo calendar. I might recognize this image right here, Mark. Here's good old, not as nice as yours maybe, but yeah, it was up in the Canadian Rockies.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be teaching this class. It's free next Thursday on preparing your images for your own photo calendar. And then I'm teaching a class on the 26th about preparing your images for print. Comes with a bunch of print credits, everything else as well. So if you're new to the nature photography classes, you'll get information here and you can just scan that QR thing all the way through. So that's all I had to say on that stuff. Back to the final thing. And the chat is absolutely blowing up all the way through. So this is really great to see, very helpful to hear about Mark's progression in your work, environmental causes. Thank you for doing that. Try again the challenges with their hands and fingers as well. So a lot of other things related on how do we get onto a backpacking trip. So you want to talk kind of to close a little bit about your expedition, or I should say, I call you an expedition photographer, but I like.
I'm kind of known for that, but I do a lot of different trips.
Yeah.
You and I are doing some backpacking. We're
gonna go for 3 weeks in Pakistan. So.
Today, yeah.
That's
Himalaya together. That's so right now, most of my trips are really small group, and I'm the only one that does them. I don't have somebody else leading trips under my umbrella, so they fill up a couple years in advance, and people do have to sign up for the mailing list by contacting me at marc@marcadamus.com. And as soon as I know that I'm going to do a specific trip somewhere, it goes right to the mailing list. And at that time, it usually fills up because I do have a lot of people that are repeats. I have people that have taken 30 trips with me over the years, and they sign up for everything. So if you get back to me pretty quickly after I release a new trip to the mailing list, then you can get on there. If you have some really specific interests, like I really want to go backpacking and I just really want to go camping, like that sort of thing, then say that when you write me to sign up for the mailing list, I can at least write you back and I can say, well, yeah, you might want to be on the lookout then for, this and this and this, kind of trip that we're going to do that is really specific to that sort of interest.
Yep. Well, it's great. I've only done 2 photography workshops in my career, one with Mark and one with Guy, and they represented 2 different spectrums. And I learned a tremendous amount on both of them. I'll be repeating with Mark going to Pakistan. I'm also joining him for the Great Sand Dunes as well. I'm going to be in the area. And it's like, rather than spend hours and hours and hours of my own time, which I do anyways when I go, it's like go with somebody that really knows and, spend some time. Mark's a huge foodie. Just FYI. So You do not
Yeah.
lose weight on his trips. So don't go
Oh,
on
that's
one of
for
Mark
sure.
Adamus's trips.
You better work hard.
You're going to lose weight because he feeds you way too well. So,
Yeah, no, man, I'm definitely appreciate that's another art form. I love all arts, but yeah, culinary is another one of my things for sure.
yeah, exactly.
I love my favorite though, my absolute the best is the Hellion trips in Alaska and stuff because I'm your chef right here.
Yeah,
And wait till you try some of my food.
exactly. So, well, I promised you I'd have you. This is your 1 day home a year. Literally not kidding. So I promised
day
him
at
I would have
this
him done
place,
by
anyway.
5:30. So
One day at this place.
1 day at this
But
place. I know you have another
home
place,
is,
but
home is whenever I'm with the family, and we travel a lot together, fortunately. So it's good.
great. Well, I just want to say thank you to all of the participants that came tonight and the questions. Sorry for the little chat snafu to start, but we got through that pretty good. I would really want to say thank you for Mark. I know this is only your second time on Zoom. I know how much you hate Zoom.
Yes. Sorry for not knowing anything about Zoom or how to use computers or any of that stuff. But
hey,
we
well,
got
your gift to the world isn't photography and Zoom. Your gift to the world
No
is the way you
kidding.
see these places. So
yeah, right on.
which is great. So, well, thanks, Mark. Enjoy the time and appreciate everybody else for joining. I will send out the recording tomorrow. It'll come out to you that are on the list that signed up, and then any other future classes you're thinking about signing up for, those are recorded if you can't make it live as well. And I'm looking forward to continuing the series. Mark, you really kicked us off well, and really thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
All right, good luck. It's a great idea, Nick. I love the whole series idea here. So I'm sure it'll be great. I mean, the lineup is incredible.
Yeah. That's great.
Right on.
All right, Mark.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Yep.
Bye, all.